Blessings, good evening. Today, being Tuesday night, we have some questions have come in. First one tonight. I heard that to practice Buddhism you need to keep all of the 5 precepts. I'm not sure how to do that because I don't know what they are. Nowadays it's easy, you just Google everything. So you can or ask ChatGPT. 5 precepts, these are basic training rules that kind of define whether you're following the Buddhist path or not. If you undertake to keep them, then that's a good start in your Buddhist practice towards the end of suffering, full enlightenment. So the way they word them, in rule by rule, say the first is Panatipata Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. So Panatipata is, you say you undertake the training rule to refrain from killing living beings. So that's an undertaking you are undertaking. So that's voluntary. Nobody makes you keep a rule like this. It's your choice. Partly you might undertake such a rule in your life because you have faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. These are the 3 refuges in Buddhism. Teachers, wise people, experienced people in the practice who recommend it as a way of training yourself. Partly through your own wisdom and understanding that you can see the value of it. Oh, this is good for me. If I have a rule like this, a training rule, it will make me more mindful of my behavior and particularly my intentions around living beings, whether it be a human or animal or tiny little insect or whatever. So it's particularly you're training in the intention not to harm, not to kill, not to harm, whether it's a fly or a person or anything else. So it's based on the understanding that before you act, there's always an intention. An intention, a volition or an intention will arise in the mind before you do something. So you're training to give up or abandon that intention, having recognized maybe that it's unskillful, going to lead to your harm if you follow through and kill. It's harboring ill will, hatred in your mind if you keep those kind of intentions in mind, and so on. In short, we say you make karma when you kill. You might say, well, kill a mosquito, that might stop the mosquito giving me or someone else malaria, or they're annoying. That's something different. Here we're just training the intention, to abandon the intention, to give, to kill, to harm. So yes, mosquitoes are definitely annoying. But actually more harmful to you is the holding on to the intention to kill. That's more trouble to you than the mosquito. But that's something you have to look into. So these precepts are worded like that. You're undertaking voluntarily, so nobody's forcing you. You're undertaking to train to refrain from killing, and then refrain from stealing, and then refrain from sexual misconduct, the 3rd one. So that means usually it's translated like adultery, cheating on your partner, but could be in any form of harmful sexual activity that involves coercion, physical violence, taking advantage of someone, and so on. But mainly it's about being honest in your relationship, because it causes a lot of hurt and harm when you're not. And you just have to look at the world and see how much damage is done when we cheat on our sexual partner. It leads on to many other things, we say. It's karma. So that means, say you have the thought come up in your mind, you meet someone you like, but you're already in a relationship. So you meet someone you like the look of, talk to them, whatever, then you're attracted to them, you may want to go with them. And of course, if you already have a partner, they would probably be very unhappy about that. But you would, if you were to break that precept, you would ignore your partner and the integrity of that relationship, and you would head off maybe with this new person. So you'd have to abandon that intention. You may still have attraction come up in the mind, and all these precepts don't yet purify your mind from anger, lust, greed, selfishness, but at the very least they stop you acting on those intentions. So you may have desire, say sexual desire, come up, but you don't act on it if you're keeping the precept. As a way of training yourself to abandon certain mental states, intentions that you've identified are going to lead to harm for yourself, for others, make karma, negative karma. So it takes mindfulness and effort and understanding to keep a precept. Undertake not to kill, not to steal, not to commit acts of sexual misconduct, not to lie, or use abusive speech, not to take intoxicants, drink drugs. All of these rules require effort, require mindfulness, require understanding and practice. So they're training rules that you practice with, and sometimes you may give in to a desire and not follow the rule in a certain situation. But if you're intent on really training your mind and rooting out these negative intentions you've identified, then you'll come back to your starting point and say, oh, I just blew it. I didn't follow the rule, and maybe already you can see the consequences, or maybe you see the regret in your mind, or maybe there's more consequences with other people and your world. So you come back and you reaffirm the intention to keep the training rule again and again and again until it becomes more normal for you. And then the intention to kill or to steal or whatever doesn't really arise anymore. And people can do this. They can train themselves. And obviously, as you keep the precepts, other qualities, positive, wholesome, skillful qualities are being encouraged. Because if you give up the intention to kill or hurt, then that naturally means what's left is kindness and compassion. So if even if a mosquito is biting you, you may even think that mosquito might have a malarial parasite and might give you the disease. You don't kill it, you maybe gently swish it away, or you move away from that place and put mosquito repellent on, or you turn a fan on, or whatever. You do something else, you do something else to deal with the problem rather than killing. And partly that's out of compassion for the mosquito or whatever living being it is. You have a sense of awareness, this is a living being and I want to protect life, I respect life. So keeping a precept brings up all these other positive qualities like mindfulness. Basically you gain a conscience of what is good and bad, or correct conduct, incorrect conduct. You gain compassion, you gain restraint. All kinds of good qualities come through keeping the precepts, which then go on to support deepening your practice, say, of meditation. Training the mind in developing states of calm and insight. And you notice when you don't keep precepts, it comes up in your mind. At the very least you have memories and you have doubts and sense of shame or sense of self-criticism, regret, because you're not keeping the precepts, and this disturbed your meditation. So anyone who meditates quickly learns the relationship between precepts and meditation. So it may seem a fairly simple thing to learn 5 rules and try and follow them, but actually is very central to Buddhist practice, and out of the practice of the precepts, many, many different things grow from that. Basically, you become wiser, more peaceful. Next question. I read that the Dhamma Vinaya taught by the Buddha is a complete way of training given to us, and we have to practice and give up to it wholeheartedly rather than pick and choose the bits that suit us. Please explain what is the complete way of practice, or the whole practice. Well, this term Dhamma Vinaya is one way the Buddha referred to what he taught when he was alive. He said, I teach this Dhamma Vinaya. Dhamma means truth, the way things are, you might say, and that includes the teachings that point to the truth. Vinaya is particularly referring to, for monks, monastic discipline, monastic training rules, but we've just been talking about 5 precepts. Say for lay people, the 5 precepts are lay people's Vinaya. It means discipline or code of conduct, based on ethics and an understanding of karma, and it's to support training the mind to abandon negative mental states rooted in greed, anger, and delusion, to go beyond them and experience freedom from suffering. So Vinaya covers lay people and monastics, monks and nuns, not just monastics. But it's the way the Buddha talked about what he taught. He didn't talk about it as a religion. That's a more modern concept. And you try and compare Buddhism to other religions, often there's problems there because they're not quite the same. The Buddha talked about it as the truth and the discipline, or Dhamma Vinaya. And he said, well, you have to practice the whole lot, the whole package, if you want to reach the goal, which is Nibbana, or the end of suffering, the freedom from all forms of stress and suffering. You have to do the whole lot to get there. It's a practice of developing the right causes, and then the correct matching results will arise. So sometimes he called it, compared it to a raft crossing an ocean, and Nibbana is like an island on the other side of the ocean that you're aiming for, or dry land, and the raft is your method to get there. You paddle your raft, sooner or later you'll hit the land. The raft is the Dhamma Vinaya, so he'd say you can't throw away your raft too quickly because you won't reach the dry land. You'll drown or get lost or eaten by sharks or whatever. And when you do reach the land, well, you've achieved your goal, and then you can leave the raft there. You don't pick the raft up and carry it around. Because some people cling too much to the teachings or the fruits of the practice in a more worldly sense. They want to be famous and successful and popular or whatever. The raft is a means to get to Nibbana, but then you set it aside. Another way to talk about the practice, it's like a bridge. Like in the old days, parts of the world, they'd make stone bridges out of blocks of stone which would be joined together, from one side of a river to another, say. And in some cases, when they're really good at it, they didn't need glue or mortar or cement. They just have these big blocks of bricks, of rock, stone, and they'd join them together in such a way that the pressure from each block on the next block would keep the whole bridge together. They make bridges like that. Of course, if you got one block missing, the whole thing would collapse, because it's spanning water, and there's a certain technique, a design that they have to get it across the water using all these interlocking blocks. But if one is missing or more are missing, then the whole thing will collapse. It won't reach from one side to the other. So that's one way of looking at this Dhamma practice or teaching of Dhamma Vinaya. You need the whole lot to get you from one side, this side of suffering, delusion, wrong views and attachments. To get from there to the other side, you need the whole bridge, every block, every part of the bridge, to get to the other side, which is the end of suffering. And the idea being that if you miss out bits of the practice, bits you don't like or don't agree with or think you don't find helpful, then you might not reach your goal. And when we're practicing, often we pick and choose, don't we? We say, I like to meditate, but I don't like to keep precepts. Or I like to keep precepts, but I don't like to meditate. Or I like listening to this teaching and practicing it, but I don't like to follow that teaching, and I don't practice that. It doesn't agree with me. We have to start investigating what the Buddha taught and see the value of developing all aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path. From right view, right thought, right livelihood, right speech, right action, right effort, right mindfulness, right samadhi. They all work together to train this human mind, and you can't kind of pick and choose which bits of the practice you like, which you don't. Although we will do that, but it will be a limitation and an obstacle that you have to investigate and go beyond. Next question. I would like to ask Ajahn regarding the 32 parts of the body contemplation or meditation method. Normally we would need to contemplate all the 32 parts, but some meditation masters said you can use all the 32 parts, or 5 parts, or even just one part. For example, for the 5 parts, if you're contemplating them, mentally recite hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin. That's the first 5 of this list of 32. Then visualize their location in the body and their foulness, unattractiveness, repulsiveness. Some meditation masters advise to reverse the order, such as skin, teeth, nails, hair of the body, hair of the head. But some say don't need to reverse the order. Can I just start with the head, hair again? So I guess you mean hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, and then jump back to hair of the head. I was told as long as you can keep your mind in these 5 objects, you can do it in whatever order you like. Well, there's certainly lots of room for experiment and finding out how this meditation works here. Like you say, when you're taught it originally, when you become a Buddhist monk, they teach you it in forward and reverse order, these first 5 objects of the body, to contemplate or to establish mindfulness of them as a way to both calm the mind and develop samadhi, and as a way to develop the perception of the unattractiveness of the body, because out in the world few people do that. They're mostly pursuing the attractiveness of the body in the way they think, the way they relate to the world. Most people, unenlightened people, do that. So these 5 meditation objects are helping you to already bring your attention to this point, because our life in a monastery is based on celibacy, no sexual activity at all, not getting married, having partner, whatever. So the body contemplation comes hand in hand with celibacy and entering the monastic order Doesn't mean to say lay people can't contemplate the body, but you have to work at it because their world outside is not really encouraging it. Just the idea of seeing the body as unattractive, repulsive is already alien to, I think, most people, many people, and we try to hide from it. But as a meditation, we can take up these 5 parts of the body: hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin. And you can approach it in any way you want. You can recite the words in Pali, like kesa, 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 or in English, hair of the head, hair of the head, hair of the head. You can visualize them, so literally put your mind up on your top of your head and visualize the hair, an individual hair, many hairs, clean hair, dirty hair, different colored hair. There's room for variation here. Partly over time you might find certain aspects of one or more of these 32 parts, or these 5 initial parts. One or more of them will come up in your mind more often and more clearly. That's part of the practice. You run through the 32 parts, or maybe just the first 5 parts, back and forth, or in whatever order you prefer, whether you want to start at the beginning and go down and back to the beginning, or back and then back up again. One of the reasons they did it in forward and reverse order is to help make you mindful, because to do it takes a bit of you have to pay attention, don't you? Hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, skin, teeth, nails, hair of the body, hair of the head. It makes you mindful just reciting this back and forth. But you can also experiment what works for you. Visualization, placing attention on the body, recitation, and even some discursive thinking about the body, how it is made up of different parts, different elements: solidity, the earth element; liquidity or cohesiveness, the water element; heat, temperature, the fire element; air and the movement in the body, the air element. Some people prefer to go straight to the elements in their contemplation. Some stick with the 32 parts, back and forth, up and down. Some will settle on one body part. That's very common over time. If you contemplate the body in your meditation, you might get to the point where one body part really, you find it easier to hold your attention on it. You recite the word, visualize it, and sometimes visual images pop up by themselves as you meditate of the different body parts. And then you can take that one visual image and develop it as a meditation object, a visual one. And many teachers and monks I've practiced with have done that. So they may find that the teeth or the hair or the skin or the bones of some part of the body becomes their main meditation object. And it can be a way they develop both samatha, samadhi, and vipassana, insight into the 3 characteristics of existence: anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness in the sense that can't bring lasting happiness, not self, no owner. Nobody owns the parts of this body. Ultimately, they just go back to nature when you die. You don't keep them. You're educating the mind to see these truths by contemplating the body. So, there was one monk who used to live in Chiang Mai who I knew, who was considered a very good meditator and enlightened, and spent a lot of his time contemplating his body, and in particular his bones. One day he had a fracture. If I remember right, it was his wrist or his hand. He had a fracture, so he went to the hospital and they x-rayed his hand, and the bones of his hand and wrist came out on the x-ray very unusual. They seemed to be almost crystalline. And later he talked to his students and said, well, he spent the last so many years contemplating the hand bones, developing one-pointedness of samadhi focused on the bones. seeing them as not self. And when an X-ray was taken, it seemed like the bones of his hand had crystallized. Just something to think about. I know it might sound a little fantastic, but there's certainly other teachers who have had similar experiences through contemplating the body. Quite amazing. And obviously when arahants die, quite often their relics appear, their bones turn to crystal when they die after they're cremated. Ajahn Chah's hair is very well known. We used to shave his hair all the time, which is a body part, and keep the hair on a shrine or in a special place, and quite often the hair of Ajahn Chah turns to crystal. Little crystals appear, it gathers together and crystallizes. Just something to think about. Another question. Ajahn, when I meditate, I reach a peaceful state, but my mind seems dark, and afterwards I'm not sure if I was asleep. Any suggestions? Need to brighten up a bit, I think. And sometimes they talk about wholesome dhammas, wholesome states of mind as being bright. They have an illuminating effect on your mind, whether it's wholesome states of mind based on sila, morality, moral integrity, samadhi, states of calm that you develop in meditation, or insight, wisdom. All aspects of the path of training brighten the mind. That's one of the results. A little bit of brightness from a little bit of training, lots of training and lots of sila, samadhi, panya may be very bright. It's a bit like a dimmer switch. The more you practice, you're turning the dimmer switch up and the mind brightens. Because sometimes you get lost into states of darkness, negativity, suffering, stress, and so it's like the dimmer switch has gone down and the mind becomes dark periodically. So if you're meditating and you feel peaceful, this is a very common experience. You're meditating on an object such as the breath, or reciting Buddha, or the body, and physically you're sitting still maybe, you become quite still and the mind settles down and you may feel calm, peaceful to a certain level. But then if you don't maintain the sharpness of your mindfulness and the continuity of your mindfulness, the mind goes to dullness. It's no longer bright, alert, awake, aware. It goes to dullness, partly because it likes being in this kind of numbed, semi-peaceful state. It's kind of better than being agitated and stressed. But it's almost asleep. I mean, it could be you go to sleep, literally go to sleep, or just in this dull state where you're kind of half aware but nothing much is happening because the mind is so dull. So it's dark. So that's not what you're aiming for in meditation, because that state you can't know anything. Your mindfulness is actually turned off. Your insight, your wisdom, your sampajanya, your clear comprehension is turned off. It's like a computer gone into hibernation mode. It's still on, there's still power there, but nothing's happening. You can't gain insight and understanding from dullness. So the idea is to wake up, literally wake yourself up, maybe by opening your eyes. If you're dull, open your eyes, sit up straighter. Find a way to stimulate yourself to get yourself back to an awakened, aware state. If you're reciting Buddha, you recite all the more. If you're contemplating the body, you recite the recitation of the part of the body or visualize it stronger. If you're with the breath, you have to get back to the breath. Maybe take some deep breaths. Bring your mind back to the breathing because you were dull. You have to bring yourself out of the dullness over and over again too, because it can be quite a habit. And an obvious solution also is to do some walking meditation when you're dull or very sleepy. So that's the aim. The aim is to bring up the mindfulness, get out of the state of dullness. Question. Greetings. I'm pretty much addicted to astrology and always make choices based on that. How do I follow the Buddhist teachings? We have to learn to put it aside and take up what the Buddha taught for practice and develop some more personal qualities of morality, mindfulness, wisdom and insight that is independent of the stars and the horoscopes. This isn't to deny, we're not denying that there is no skill in astrology, and some astrologers can seem to be very accurate, and obviously that's why people love it. But it's not 100% accurate. It can never be, because things can change. One thing that changes people's karma and the direction they're going in their life very quickly is the practice of meditation. And so we know the Buddha himself, when he was born, all the leading astrologers of his time came together because his father's the king, so he called them together and said, what's going to happen to this baby? And 7 of them said, well, he'll either become a great king, successful, conquer lots of new land, be very powerful, or he'll become a great religious leader and show people the way out of suffering. But one said, no, he will definitely become a religious leader. He's not going to go the way of the world, which scared his dad, because his dad wanted to try and make him into a king. It's generally what dads do, try and get the son to follow somewhat in their footsteps. So the astrologers got it wrong with the Buddha. It doesn't mean to say completely wrong, there was some truth to what they said. It's just you can't take the astrology as your whole guideline for life. It's too risky, because some get it wrong, some are manipulating you, some are just deluded, and things can change, and partly that's out of your efforts to change things for the better. Because if you develop a sort of fatalistic view, or if the stars said this is going to happen, or I can't do that, you might just start believing the stars and give up. And people do all the time, don't they? They give up on their partner, in their relationship, they give up on their job, they give up on all kinds of aspirations, or they become very paralyzed with fear because they're worried they're going to get ill, and this happened, that happened, or it just narrows down their thinking, so they're no longer developing mindfulness and insight into the conditions of what's arising in their experience. The astrology tends to be based on personality view, what we call Sakkaya Ditthi. So as long as you're using this astrology to guide the way you think and look at the world, it tends to bring up this solid sense of a self, me, going places, meeting with success, meeting with failure. It's always about a me, a self, a person, a being. Whereas the Buddhist path is helping you to go beyond that, or go deeper into seeing the 5 khandhas, seeing a person as more like a process of physical and mental phenomena acting on each other, and with insight one can see through that. And obviously an arahant, somebody who's completed the Buddhist path, who's reached Nibbana, has gone beyond the influence of astrology, for example. And you could still say the astrologer says this guy's going to become an arahant. Well, maybe the astrologer knows a few things, but in terms of practicing to remove greed, anger and delusion from your heart, the astrology cannot do that. You have to do that by developing the right causes of sila, samadhi, panya. So we're not saying there's no truth at all to astrology and horoscopes, but we also, it's not sure. It's not 100%. They can get it wrong. Things can change. What is it like? Some people will say, Ajahn Chah, his samadhi, his psychic powers were so amazing. Why didn't he give more lottery numbers? Because he'd never give lottery numbers. And in Thailand, everyone goes to the monks with the great meditation wanting a lottery number. And he said one of his answers to that question was, maybe I do give the lottery numbers, but the people don't have the merit to win. Something blocks them, something happens. So astrology can be like that. It may give a prediction or a trend in your life, but it still depends on many causes and conditions, whether you're going to be successful or not. I went to an astrologer once. My brother took me when I first went to Thailand, and the astrologer said, this life I'll get married twice. Still haven't got married, so I guess there's still time. Dear Luang Por, thank you for the teachings. Can you please explain what it means, the 4 pairs of beings, the 8 kinds of noble ones? Thank you. Well, as you know from our evening chanting and from various suttas, the way the Buddha talked about the development, the maturity of the human mind following this path, the Noble Eightfold Path, as you go through stages of awakening, stages of enlightenment, which can be kind of measured by what you've abandoned, what you haven't abandoned, what you have abandoned, in terms of kilesa, negative mental states. So the first stage of enlightenment we call stream enterer or stream winner, sotapanna. They've abandoned certain things such as doubt about the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, doubt about the path, practice. They've abandoned wrong grasping of rites and rituals, external practices. You know, when we're just believing if I do this, then I'll get enlightened for sure, without developing much mindfulness or insight. So even the Buddha had this problem when he was practicing various ascetic practices, but with the wrong view. He still had grasping and clinging, attachment to wrong views. Attachment to astrology could come under there, you know, assuming that the astrology is the way to go, always believing that and using that as your guideline. What do the stars say? The stars say this, okay, and you believe that, you know, it becomes a block in developing deeper insight, perhaps. And also the Sotapanna, the stream enterer, stream winner, has abandoned the most important one, Sakkaya Ditthi, self-view, the view that this is a permanent, lasting self, this body, this mind. This is where all our trouble comes from. They've abandoned that. Their view has changed. The way they look at themselves and the world changes. So certain things drop away, like wrong views, stinginess. Their ethical nature of their mind has changed. They've abandoned their causes to break the 5 precepts. So they stop thinking to kill, to steal. They don't think like that anymore. So certain things change for the first level of enlightenment. And then the second level of enlightenment is Sakadagami, they call it a once returner. They've reduced the strength of greed and lust and anger and hatred. Well, no more hatred anyway, but anger. These mental defilements still arise, but in a much diminished way. The third level of enlightenment, they've completely abandoned greed, lust, anger, abandon all attachment to the body. So they call them a non-returner, anagami. And they will no longer be reborn as a human. If they still have rebirth, it will be in a Brahma realm, one of these higher, refined Brahma realms. The last level of enlightenment, the complete, full enlightenment of Nibbana, is the Arahant, completely abandoned all of the, what we call the 10 fetters, which were beginning with Sakkaya Ditthi and self-view and doubt and attachment to rites and rituals, right through to the final one, which is just avijja, ignorance. All ignorance has been abandoned from their mind, their consciousness. So you might call it a step-by-step process of abandoning certain negative qualities that lead to suffering and rebirth. So one level includes the person who is practicing the path, which we call magga, the path, and then phala, the fruit. So there's sotapatti, magga, phala, the path of a sotapanna, a stream enterer, and then the fruit. Path of the once returner and the fruit, path of the non-returner and the fruit, path of the arahant, and then the fruit, nibbana, the arahant. So the way the Buddha talked about them as two different people, even though it can be the one person, but it's just at different stages of their development. So it's like two different people, because the changes are so revolutionary, so complete. It's as if you're a different person when you experience the fruit of each level of awakening. And they're all worthy of respect, honour, because they're people who have furthered themselves along this path of enlightenment and abandoned all kinds of very coarse and negative qualities, and their minds have become brighter, happier, more peaceful. This is something to aspire to, so we pay respects to these 4 beings, or the 8 pairs of noble beings, path and fruit on each level. It's part of our refuge. In Buddhism, we refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So these 4 noble beings, the stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, arahant, are the 4 noble beings, but also dividing into path and fruit. Plenty to read up on if you're interested. Oh, there was another question. Is this a reasonable way to divide the practice? Yeah, I'd say it's reasonable. It's convenient, isn't it? But it's a way of reflecting, isn't it? There's the path, and then there's the fruit. There's the doing of it, and then what happens to your mind. But we're particularly talking about the human mind, the evolution of a human mind in spiritual terms or Dhamma terms. And there are things that you abandon along the way, because if you are still having self-view or anger, you're not an arahant, you're not even an anagami, a non-returner. There's things, it's a way of measuring the path. Having said that, you approach it with caution, because you don't want to spend your life and your practice as a Buddhist, have I abandoned this, have I not, is it there, is it not? People can become obsessed or try to exaggerate their practice, or just get deluded by things, get caught out. They think they've abandoned something and they haven't. So, they get guidelines to help you in your development and to understand how the practice progresses for anyone, male, female, whoever. But they're not to be a basis for attachment either, in the sense that, trying to fit your practice to these descriptions can be an obstacle for some people, sometimes. Another question. Oh, sorry, I read the question wrong. This comment, is this a reasonable way to practice, is referring to the next question. So, it says AM, I guess morning, samatha, metta practice, development of loving kindness as a meditation. PM, samatha, meaning meditation on the body contemplation, which can lead into vipassana, insight meditation. AM, PM, so morning or afternoon or evening. Well, it's one way. I don't think there's absolutes here. You can experiment, see what works, and certainly sometimes you put a lot of effort into samatha, to calm your mind and abandon hindrances, to prepare the way for vipassana. That's the traditional way it's taught. So quite often that can be done, whether it's in one meditation session, half an hour on samatha, half an hour on vipassana, or more broadly over a period of a day, samatha in the morning, vipassana in the evening. But I would suggest maybe over time you also become kind of adept at knowing what you need. And sometimes you can go straight to vipassana, or sometimes you would like to develop vipassana, but you should really do more samatha. And there's a little bit of, skill and experience will give you what you need to do at different times. Sometimes it's like that. But as a basic game plan or structure for your practice, well, yeah, you might divide time, whether it's within one individual meditation period, or say through a retreat, if you're meditating many times a day, where you might divide up the activities like you've described. That could work, yeah. But you have to see what's working for you and the results. Another question. Dear Luang Por, thank you for the teachings and I wish you well. Is it correct to say that to cultivate right view, we have to look at our existence from the perspective of the Four Noble Truths? Can the Noble Eightfold Path help us to cultivate right view? After listening to one of your talks and contemplating it, I believe my frustration originated from the attachment to self-view. I hope to diminish or uproot this feeling of frustration. Please guide me. It's quite a big question, that, actually. Ajahn Chah always said, when you're frustrated, be patient. We need more patience. The Buddha said, patient endurance is the highest austerity or the supreme destroyer of mental defilement, including impatience. So be patient with feelings of frustration is a good starting point. And yes, develop insight into the Four Noble Truths is always a good thing, I think. Listening to the Dhamma, reading suttas, you'll find that they're all moving around, explaining further, going deeper into these Four Noble Truths. So it's a good plan to get your thinking in terms of Four Noble Truths. Suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, the path leading to the end of suffering. Suffering is to be known, the cause, craving and attachment, to be abandoned. The end of suffering, Nirodha, is to be realized. The path of the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to the end of suffering is to be developed, to be walked. So there's a really good framework for developing your practice, both in how you reflect on your life and what's going on in your mind from moment to moment, as well as working out skillful means like developing meditation techniques, reflecting on your precepts and your general kind of moral integrity, looking at your livelihood, your actions, your speech. The Four Noble Truths are a very good way to develop your thinking and your view of life and your practice. And they'll deepen through the practice, so you hear them first or read them first, get your explanation, then you practice, and then that understanding deepens, so you're no longer just remembering them, but you're actually observing them from moment to moment in your experience. And then they start to really give some results. So yeah, generally speaking, go to the Four Noble Truths is a very good starting point for your framework of practice, how you think, how you look at things, and then investigate them. Luang Por, thank you very much for teaching us so tirelessly. I have a couple of questions, if I may. One, during this Vasa range retreat, should I prioritize sleep or meditation? It depends, I guess. If you're having sleep problems, you may need to sleep more. Most people probably sleep too much though, so possibly you need to decide what is the right amount for you, health-wise, mentally, so your mind can work, but you're not indulging. And that can vary from person to person. Some people can get by with a lot less than others, it would seem. As I said, as a rule of thumb, most of us probably sleep a bit more than we need to, because it's something that can very much lead to indulgence. And one of the dangers of sleep is that moment, that period as you're falling asleep or waking up where the mind is fuzzy, and we often indulge in a lot of unskillful or confused thinking at those moments. So at least sometimes you might push against the desire to sleep, like today is the Buddhist holy day. We tend to stay up late in the monastery and meditate, not going to sleep at the normal time maybe. Sometimes that's a really useful practice because of our tendency to indulge, or we have habitual sleep where we just go to sleep just because it's a certain time rather than whether we really need it or not. So it's something you need to investigate. But how much you sleep, there's a lot of variation here. You need to look at your own health and well-being, state of mind, and also experiment. So really it goes together. You said, do I prioritize sleep or meditation? Well, meditation, that's part of meditation, is becoming more mindful and aware of this body, this mind, various processes such as eating, sleeping, socializing, how you spend your time, posture, how much you sit, how much you walk, how much you sleep, lie down maybe. There's a lot to learn from all this, and a retreat time is a time to learn from things like this. How much you need to eat, how much you need to sleep, how does it affect your mind? More sleep, more food, less food, more talking, less talking. You can learn from all this. So you take yourself as the center of this experiment, and then you're observing what's going on, and maybe you set rules for periods of time to give yourself more information, more facts about how you cope with more or less sleep, more food, less food, and so on. You might call this partly just the practice of sila, precepts, training rules. Sometimes we need to set ourselves, undertake training rules to bring up certain qualities like effort, mindfulness, insight. Sometimes you go very strict, then you relax. Generally, as a rule of thumb, we go strict first and then relax later, because if you relax first, it's hard to get strict again later. So that's the sort of rule of thumb, the guideline for these basic kind of aspects of life: how much you're going to eat, sleep, talk, look at computers, all the things that we do. You can start making your own guidelines for yourself to become more mindful and train yourself. Just as we train the body, when you're doing physical exercise, you can make rules for yourself for training the mind. And becoming aware of sleep is part of meditation, developing mindfulness, insight. Knowing the difference between sleep that's necessary for the body, sleep that is just habit or indulgence, where you're just you're losing your effort in your meditation, so you just take a quiet nap as you're meditating, or you just let yourself drift off. You're learning to see the difference. Sometimes you're genuinely exhausted, okay, then you need a rest. Other times it's more just, you might say, laziness or apathy of mind. So you're learning to see the difference between those two things. Last question. Should I leave the monastery to visit the noble ones or stay and practice diligently? Well, generally speaking, we try and seek out Kalyana Mitta and good teachers, which may be noble ones. Generally, we get joy when we meet such people, don't we? Or even the thought of meeting them, or the memory of having met them in the past. It brings joy, brings effort, energy in the practice. So generally, it's a good thing. But say you're on retreat, well, even the noble ones would say, well, don't spend too much time thinking about who you should go and meet and where you should travel to next. Get into your meditation if you're on retreat, which is what the Vasa is. It's a 3-month retreat. The Buddha actually said, it's a foolish monk who enters the retreat thinking where he's going to go after the retreat. If you haven't finished your retreat yet, stop thinking about, which teacher you want to see and all that. Get into your practice in the here and now, day by day, and also, rejoice in the fact we have a lot of books, talks, internet now. So even in a retreat, you may not be physically with a noble one, but you can hear their Dhamma or read their Dhamma, recollect their Dhamma. That's an amazing thing. Ajahn Chah would quite often shoo monks away who were getting too attached to him. We consider him as a noble one, but often he'd say, "Oh, you go and spend the rains retreat somewhere else," so that they wouldn't get too attached or clingy or dependent on the teacher, because that's one of, it's a human weakness. We cling to people sometimes too much, and it can become an obstacle. So, there's something to contemplate there. So maybe I'll leave that.